The buttercream was sweating. Not profusely, but just enough to make the delicate filigree piping on the third tier glisten with a nervous dew under the fluorescent lights of the delivery van. Elara Voss noticed this with the same acute, almost painful attention to detail that she noticed everything. The slight asymmetry in a rose petal, the microscopic air bubble trapped in a sugar pearl, the way the gold leaf on the Vitale family crest caught the light at a 45-degree angle, but fell flat at 50. It was a curse, really, this obsession. It made her the best damn pastry artist in the city, but it also made her a wreck on delivery days. Today, however, the stakes were higher than a 7-tier croquembouche. This wasn't just a wedding cake. This was a Vitale wedding cake. The kind of commission that could lift her tiny, debt-ridden bakery out of the red and into the black for the first time in 3 years. She drove with the reverence of a bomb disposal technician, taking corners so slowly that the cars behind her blared their horns in furious, metallic screams. The address was scrawled on a napkin by her assistant, Marco, who had taken the order over the phone, while Elara's hands were buried in a vat of Italian meringue. Marco's handwriting was a disaster, a chaotic scrawl that looked like a seismograph during an earthquake. She squinted at the napkin taped to the dashboard. The Grand Asteria Ballroom, 1428, Alabaster Drive. She'd passed the Asteria a million times. It was a gilded, marble-clad monstrosity that hosted quinceañeras, bar mitzvahs, and, apparently, the engagement parties of the city's most dangerous crime family. Elara caught her reflection in the rearview mirror and immediately wished she hadn't. A round, flushed face stared back, framed by a frizzy halo of caramel-colored curls that had escaped the confines of a hairnet. Her cheeks were splotchy from the heat of the ovens, and a smear of dark chocolate ganache clung stubbornly to her collarbone, just above the neckline of her flour-dusted black tunic. She looked exactly like what she was, a plus-size baker who hadn't slept in 36 hours. She tried to wipe the ganache away with a spit-dampened thumb, but only succeeded in smearing it into a brownish bruise. The contrast between her and the cake she was carrying was almost comical. The cake was pristine, regal, a monument to refined sugar and impossible standards. She was a mess, a soft, heavy woman who took up too much space in the driver's seat and whose knees ached from standing on concrete floors. Alabaster Drive was a canyon of wealth. The buildings here didn't just scrape the sky. They sneered at it. As Elara pulled the van up to the service entrance of the Grand Asteria, a wave of nausea rolled through her stomach. The service entrance alone was nicer than her entire apartment. Men, in crisp black suits, with earpieces coiled into their collars, stood like statues, their eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. One of them detached himself from the wall and approached the van with the fluid, predatory grace of a panther. "Delivery," Elara said, her voice coming out as a croak. She cleared her throat. "Cake delivery for the engagement party." The man, whose jaw looked like it had been chiseled from granite, glanced at a clipboard. Name, Voss. Elara Voss. From Sweet Surrender. Bakery. He checked the list, his expression unchanging. "You're not on the list." Elara's heart plummeted into her orthopedic insoles. "No, I have to be. It's a 7-tier vanilla bean and raspberry cake, with a hand-painted gold crest. It cost more than my van. Please, check again." He checked again, his finger tracing down the paper with infuriating slowness. "There's a cake on the list. From Le Jardin de Sucre." Humder. Le Jardin de Sucre. The name hit Elara like a physical blow. That was the most expensive, most pretentious patisserie in the state, run by a skeletal Frenchman named Claude, who thought buttercream was a sin against nature. No, no, that's wrong. The order is from Sweet Surrender. I have the invoice right here. She fumbled in her bag, pulling out a crumpled, butter-stained piece of paper. As she handed it over, a cold dread began to crystallize in her veins. Marco's handwriting. The napkin. The Grand Asteria. But the Vitale family had two venues in the city. The Asteria and the Crystal Palisade. She looked at the invoice. The client's address for the venue was listed as 1428 Alabaster Drive, but the client's name was just A. Vitale. She had assumed it was for the main event. What if the main event was at the Palisade, and this was a different party? A smaller, pre-party? Or worse, what if Marco had written down the wrong address entirely? The security guard was already shaking his head. This isn't a Le Jardin invoice. I know. That's what I'm saying. I'm not from Le Jardin. I'm from Sweet Surrender. The order was placed by a Mr. Marco for A. Vitale. This is the cake. A second guard, even larger and more imposing than the first, walked over. Problem? Wrong bakery. The first guard said, his voice flat. Le Jardin is bringing the cake. This one's not authorized. Elara felt a hot, prickly wave of desperation. If she didn't deliver this cake, she wouldn't get paid. If she didn't get paid, she couldn't make rent on the bakery. It was a simple, brutal equation. Please, she begged, hating the tremor in her voice. I've been working on this for 3 days straight. It's a Vitale cake. Just look at the crest. It's perfect. It's hand-painted. You can't just send me away. The second guard glanced into the back of the van, where the cake sat in its refrigerated box. Even through the plastic windows of the box, the cake glowed. The gold leaf shimmered. The sugar flowers, peonies and ranunculus, looked deceptively real. It was a masterpiece. The guard's expression flickered, just for a second. Wait here, he said, and walked away, speaking into his wrist. Elara waited. The minutes stretched, elastic and torturous. She could hear the muffled thump of bass-heavy music from inside the ballroom, the clinking of glasses, the high, brittle laughter of people who had never worried about rent. Finally, a woman appeared at the service entrance. She was tall, razor-thin, and dressed in a stark white pantsuit that screamed power and money. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a ponytail so tight it looked like a facelift. Her face was beautiful in the way a diamond was beautiful, hard, sharp, and utterly cold. This, Elara knew instinctively, was the bride, or the bride-to-be. Alessia Vitale, if the society pages were to be believed. What is this? Alessia's voice was a whip crack. She didn't look at Elara. She looked at the cake box, her lips curling into a sneer. I ordered from Claude. Who are you? I'm Elara Voss, from Sweet Surrender. I believe there was a mix-up with the orders, but I have the cake here. It's made to your specifications. The family crest, the gold leaf, the raspberry filling. I don't eat raspberry, Alessia interrupted, her eyes finally landing on Elara. They swept over her flour-dusted tunic, her messy hair, her plump, anxious face, with undisguised contempt. And I certainly don't eat anything made by someone who looks like they've been rolling in the dough quite literally. This is a private, high-security event. You're not on the list. You're not Claude. Leave. A small crowd had begun to gather by the service door, drawn by the commotion. They were all beautiful, all thin, all dripping in diamonds and designer silk. They looked at Elara, the way one might look at a cockroach that had scuttled out from under a baseboard. A man with a goatee and a velvet blazer snickered. Looks like she ate the first cake, he murmured, loud enough for everyone to hear. A ripple of laughter spread through the group. Elara's face burned. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had been fat her whole life. She had been mocked, dismissed, and invisible her whole life. But she had never, ever, had her work insulted. The cake was her shield, her proof of worth, and they were laughing at her while it sat there, perfect and ignored. "The crest," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Just look at the crest. It's perfect." Alessia waved a dismissive hand. "Claude is bringing the real cake. Get this. Well, out of my sight, before I have security remove you." It was the casual cruelty that broke something inside Elara. The way Alessia said, "thing," as if Elara and the cake were the same lump of unwanted matter. Elara turned to go, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. But as she turned, she caught a glimpse of the cake under the bright loading dock lights. The gold crest. The Vitale family crest. She had spent 12 hours painting it, hunched over with a magnifying glass and a brush with 3 hairs. She knew every curve, every line. It was a complex emblem, a lion rampant, holding a key, surrounded by a wreath of olive branches, with a banner underneath, bearing the Latin motto, Fidelis et Fortis. Faithful and strong. She had cross-referenced it with 3 historical archives to make sure it was accurate. But now, seeing it in the harsh light, next to the actual building, a tiny, almost imperceptible detail snagged at her brain. The key in the lion's paw. In the Vitale crest, the key had 3 teeth. Always 3. It symbolized the 3 original Vitale brothers who founded the family's shipping empire in Sicily. But on the cake, Elara had painted the key with 3 teeth. So why did it feel wrong? She looked at the napkin in her hand, where Marco had scribbled a rough sketch of the crest, based on the client's description. The sketch had 3 teeth, but Elara, in her obsessive research, had found a 4th, smaller tooth, hidden in the design of the original 18th century crest, a detail that was often lost in modern reproductions. She had included it because she was a perfectionist. She had painted 4 teeth. And then she saw it, on the security guard's lapel, a small silver pin, the official Vitale security emblem. The key had 3 teeth, just 3. The 4th tooth, the hidden one, was missing. A cold, sharp shiver ran down Elara's spine. It wasn't just a stylistic choice. In the world of heraldry, a hidden symbol, a difference mark, was often used to denote a specific branch of a family or a secret society within it. But more importantly, a missing symbol on a public document or a public cake could mean something else entirely. It could mean the person who ordered it didn't know the secret. They were copying a public version of the crest, a fake. Elara's mind raced. She was a nobody, a fat baker from a failing shop. But she was also a woman who had spent her childhood reading dusty books on medieval guilds and family sigils while other kids played outside. She knew that in the old country, a marriage contract wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a binding heraldic agreement. The family crests were merged, and the details mattered. If Alessia was using a fake, incomplete crest on her engagement cake, what else was she faking? "Wait," Elara said, her voice stronger now. She turned back to face the sneering crowd. "The crest is wrong." Alessia froze. The laughter died in the velvet-blazered man's throat. "What did you say?" Alessia hissed. "The crest. On my cake. It's the real one. But the one you're using, the one on your invitations, on your security pins, it's missing a detail. A secret detail that only the direct bloodline knows about." Alessia's face went pale, then flushed a deep, ugly red. "You're insane. You're a crazy, fat lunatic who's bitter because she wasn't invited to the party. Security. Get her out of here." The two guards stepped forward, but a new voice cut through the tension. Let her speak. The voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and a man stepped into the loading dock. He was tall, with dark hair slicked back, and eyes the color of a winter storm. He wasn't classically handsome. His features were too sharp, too predatory. The nose slightly crooked, as if it had been broken once and never set properly. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, but it did nothing to hide the coiled, lethal power in his frame. This was Dante Vitale, the head of the family, the boss, and beside him, a silent shadow in a gray suit, was a man with kind eyes and wire-rimmed glasses, Luca Abate, the family's consigliere, and Dante's childhood friend. Dante's gaze swept over the scene, the trembling baker, the furious bride, the half-hidden cake, and settled on Elara. You said the crest is wrong. Explain. Elara's throat was dry. She was standing in front of the most dangerous man in the city, a man who could make people disappear with a nod, and she was about to call his fiancé a fraud. But the scholar in her, the obsessive, detail-oriented hermit, took over. The key, she said, pointing to the cake. In the true Vitale crest, the key in the lion's paw has 4 teeth, not 3. The 4th is small, hidden behind the main shaft. It's a mark of the Vitale di Pietra branch, the original line from the old country. It's a secret mark, used to authenticate blood oaths and marriage contracts. The public crest, the one on your letterhead, has 3 teeth. But a wedding cake, a symbol of the family union, should have the true 4-toothed key. I painted it that way because I research everything. But she, Elara gestured to Alessia, she didn't know. She gave my assistant a 3-toothed sketch. A deathly silence fell over the loading dock. Dante's expression didn't change, but the temperature around him seemed to drop by 20 degrees. He turned his head slowly to look at Alessia. Is this true? It's ridiculous, Alessia spat, but her voice was too high, too shrill. She's lying. She's trying to ruin our day because I rejected her cheap, ugly cake. Luca, the quiet consigliere, stepped forward. He adjusted his glasses and peered at the cake, then at the security pin on the guard's lapel. He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and then showed the screen to Dante. It was an image of an ancient, yellowed document, the original Vitale family charter, preserved in a vault. The crest on the document clearly showed a key with 4 teeth. She's right, Dante, Luca said, his voice soft but firm. The 4th tooth is the mark of the true line. It's a detail that has never been made public. Only a handful of people in the world know about it, and Alessia isn't one of them. Dante's eyes, cold and gray, fixed on Alessia. You gave the baker the wrong crest. It wasn't a question. It was a mistake, a simple mistake. I'm not a historian. Alessia was backpedaling now, her perfect composure crumbling. Dante, my love, you can't seriously believe this. Nobody. Over me? I believe in details, Dante said, his voice dangerously calm. And I believe in Luca. He's been my family's lawyer for 15 years. He knows our history better than I do. He took a step closer to Alessia, and she flinched. The marriage contract, the inheritance clause, it was all contingent on the union of the 2 true bloodlines, verified by the heraldic symbols. You insisted on a traditional ceremony. You insisted on the crests. You were going to use a fake crest to seal a fraudulent contract and steal half of my family's legacy. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and lethal. The guests, who had been so eager to mock Elara moments before, were now staring at Alessia with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. The velvet-blazered man looked like he wanted to crawl under a table. "No, I would never. I love you." Alessia's voice cracked, and for the first time, Elara saw real fear in her eyes, the fear of a cornered animal. "Luca," Dante said, not taking his eyes off Alessia. "Take her to the study. Find the contract. Find out who she's working with." Luca nodded, his kind eyes now hard as flint. He gestured to the guards, who, after a moment of hesitation, moved to flank Alessia. Their loyalty was to the boss, not the fake bride. "This is an outrage," Alessia shrieked as they took her arms. "You'll regret this, Dante. My family will hear about this." "Your family," Dante said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire dock, "will be lucky if I don't burn their house to the ground with them inside it. Get her out of my sight." As Alessia was dragged away, her screams fading into the bowels of the hotel, Dante turned back to Elara. She was shaking, her hands gripping the edge of the cake box so hard her knuckles were white. She had just publicly unmasked a con artist in front of the entire Mafia elite. She had made herself a target, a witness, a variable in a very dangerous equation. She expected anger, or dismissal, or a threat to keep her mouth shut. Instead, Dante Vitale looked at her, really looked at her. His gaze traveled from her messy hair to her flour-dusted tunic, to the chocolate smear on her neck, and finally to her eyes. "What is your name?" "Elara. Elara Voss." "Elara Voss," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "You have done me a great service today. You saw what no one else saw. You saved my family from a catastrophic mistake." He paused, his storm-gray eyes holding hers. "And they laughed at you." Elara didn't know what to say. A single tear, which she had been holding back for 10 minutes, finally escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek. It's a very good cake," she whispered. A ghost of a smile flickered at the corner of Dante's mouth. It was a dangerous smile, a smile that promised things Elara couldn't even begin to imagine. "I'm sure it is, but it's an engagement cake for a wedding that is no longer happening. That seems like a waste." He looked at the cake, then back at her. "We're going to have a different kind of party tonight, a celebration of loyalty, of true things. Bring the cake inside." "But the other cake? From Le Jardin?" "Claude can send his cake back to France," Dante said. "Tonight, we eat the cake made by the woman who sees the truth." What happened next was a blur of sensory overload. Elara found herself inside the Grand Asteria ballroom, a space so opulent it made her teeth ache. Chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, like frozen waterfalls of diamonds. The guests, the same ones who had mocked her, now parted before her with a mixture of awe and terror. She was no longer the fat baker. She was the oracle, the woman who had the boss's ear. She directed the placement of the cake on the central table, her hands trembling as she removed the refrigerated box. The cake stood revealed under the chandelier light, and a collective gasp went through the room. It was magnificent. The gold leaf shimmered, the sugar flowers looked freshly picked, and the four-toothed key on the crest seemed to wink in the light. Dante stood beside her, his presence a wall of heat and danger. He didn't leave her side for the rest of the night. He made her sit at the head table, in the chair that had been meant for Alessia. He brought her a plate of food, ignoring her protests that she wasn't dressed for the occasion. "You're the guest of honor," he said simply. "You can wear whatever you want." Luca returned an hour later, his expression grim. He whispered something in Dante's ear, and Dante's jaw tightened. The conspiracy was deeper than they thought. Alessia was a plant, a pawn in a rival family's scheme to drain the Vitale accounts and seize their shipping routes. The fake crest was the linchpin of the legal fraud. Without Elara's obsessive attention to detail, the plan would have worked. As the night wore on, Elara felt a strange shift in the atmosphere. The fear and adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion, but also a strange, unfamiliar warmth. Dante Vitale was looking at her not with pity or gratitude, but with a focused, burning intensity that made her feel like the only woman in the room. He asked her about her bakery, about her knowledge of heraldry, about her life. He listened to her answers with an unnerving stillness, as if cataloging every word. "You're wasted in that bakery," he said, late in the evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The noise of the party was a distant hum behind them. "A mind like yours, it's a weapon. You see patterns where others see noise." "It's just a hobby," Elara said, hugging her arms against the chill. "Cakes are my real passion. Cakes are your art, but this is your power." He turned to face her, his gray eyes reflecting the city lights. "I want to hire you." Elara blinked. "To bake for you? To see for me? To look at documents, at contracts, at the symbols my enemies use, to find the lies? I have lawyers, I have soldiers, but I don't have anyone who can spot a fake four-toothed key on a cake. I need that. I need you." The offer was insane. It was dangerous. It was a doorway into a world of shadows and violence. Every rational cell in Elara's body screamed at her to say no, to go back to her tiny bakery and her quiet, lonely life. But another part of her, the part that had been silenced by years of mockery and dismissal, roared to life. He saw her, not as a fat, messy baker, but as a valuable, powerful asset. He saw the thing she loved most about herself, her obsessive, weird, detail-oriented brain, and called it a weapon. I'll think about it," she said. "Don't think too long," Dante replied, a hint of that dangerous smile returning. "I'm not a patient man." He drove her home himself, not in a limousine, but in a sleek, black sports car that smelled of leather, and him, a scent of cedarwood, gunpowder, and cold winter air. He walked her to the door of her tiny apartment above the bakery, and under the flickering streetlight, he took her hand. His touch was electric, a jolt that went straight to her core. "Thank you, Elara Voss," he said, his voice low and rough, "for the cake, and for the truth." Then he was gone, the roar of his engine fading into the night, leaving Elara standing on her doorstep, her hands still tingling, her heart pounding a frantic, confused rhythm against her ribs. She had walked into the lion's den expecting to be devoured. Instead, the lion had asked her to stay. The next morning, she woke up to a news alert on her phone. The engagement of Dante Vitale to Alessia Romano was officially off. The Romano family was in chaos, their assets frozen, pending an investigation into fraud, and on the doorstep of sweet surrender. Bakery. There was a single, long-stemmed white rose and a black credit card with a note attached. The note was written in a sharp, elegant hand. "For your next masterpiece, and for your retainer, DV." Elara stared at the card, her fingers tracing the embossed letters of his initials. The sensible part of her brain, the part that had kept her safe and small for 28 years, told her to cut the card in half. The other part, the part that had stood up to a room full of mocking elites and pointed out a four-toothed key, told her to buy a new pair of shoes, and maybe a new life. She went inside and started a pot of coffee. She had a lot of thinking to do, but as she measured the grounds, she found herself smiling. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She was a weapon, and she was about to be aimed at the heart of the underworld. The following days were a strange, suspended animation. The bakery was flooded with orders. The story of the cake that broke the Mafia engagement had leaked, as these things always do, mutating into a dozen different urban legends. Some said Elara was a secret agent. Others said she was a witch who could see the future in sugar. The truth was simpler and stranger. She was just a woman who really, really liked old books. Marco, her assistant, was simultaneously terrified and thrilled. "We're famous, Elle! We're gonna need a bigger oven!" But Elara was distracted. The black credit card sat in her cash register, unused. The rose had dried, and she had hung it upside down from a pipe in the kitchen, a strange talisman. She was waiting. She didn't know for what. A sign, maybe. A reason to say yes. It came on a Thursday afternoon, during the post-lunch lull. A black SUV pulled up outside the bakery, and Luca Abate, the quiet consigliere, stepped out. He was alone. He walked into the bakery, the little bell above the door jingling cheerfully, a stark contrast to the serious expression on his face. He was carrying a leather briefcase. "Ms. Voss," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Do you have a moment?" Elara wiped her hands on her apron, her heart hammering. "Of course. Can I get you a coffee? A cannoli?" "Just a moment of your time." He sat down at one of the tiny bistro tables, and Elara sat opposite him. He opened the briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "Dante asked me to draw these up. It's a standard consulting contract. Very generous terms. He wasn't exaggerating when he said he wanted to hire you." Elara looked at the papers, the dense legal text blurring before her eyes. "Luca, I'm a baker. I don't know anything about the Mafia. You know about symbols. And right now, that's more valuable than 100 soldiers." Luca leaned forward, his kind eyes serious. The Romano scheme was just the tip of the iceberg. They've been infiltrating our business for years, using forged documents, fake deeds, counterfeit historical claims. We're a family built on tradition, Ms. Voss. Our power comes from our history. If our enemies can rewrite that history, they can destroy us. We need someone who can authenticate the past. You're that someone. Why me? There are real historians, professors. We can't trust them. They have ties, allegiances, academic egos. You're an outsider, a neutral party, and you have something none of them have. What's that? Dante's attention. Luca said it simply, without judgment. He trusts you. He doesn't trust anyone. That makes you the most powerful person in this room. Elara looked down at the contract. The salary was obscene. It was more money than she made in a year. It was buy a house money, retire her parents' money, but it was also sell your soul money. What happens if I find something he doesn't like? What if I make a mistake? You won't. You see things. It's a gift. Luca paused. But to answer your question, Dante is many things. Ruthless, violent, obsessive. But he is not unfair. He protects what is his. And if you sign this, you become his. His to protect. His to keep. There it was. The warning wrapped in a promise. The golden cage. Elara thought about her life. The lonely nights. The endless struggle. The way people looked at her, or rather, didn't look at her. And she thought about the way Dante had looked at her on that balcony, like she was the only real thing in a world of fakes. She picked up the pen. "Where do I sign?" Luca smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. "Welcome to the family, Ms. Voss." Her first assignment was a baptism by fire, literally. A week later, a fire broke out in the Vitale family archive, a dusty, neglected room in the basement of their corporate headquarters. It was ruled an accident, faulty wiring. But Dante knew better. The fire had been set to destroy a specific set of documents. The original shipping manifests from the 1920s. The ones that proved the Vitale family's legal ownership of the South Harbor docks. Without those manifests, a rival family, the Costellos, could claim the docks under a squatter's rights loophole. Elara was brought to the archive the morning after the fire. The room was a blackened, waterlogged ruin. The smell of wet ash and burnt paper was overwhelming. Dante was there, standing amidst the wreckage, his face a mask of cold fury. "They burned our history," he said, his voice vibrating with rage. "They think they've won." Elara walked through the debris, her heart sinking. The manifests were gone, reduced to ash. But as she sifted through the remains, her obsessive eye caught something. A pattern. The fire had been hot, but not uniform. The metal filing cabinets had warped, but the drawers had protected some of the contents. And in the corner, a small, fireproof safe was still intact. It was an old safe, a Victor model from the 1940s, covered in soot. The door was ajar, the lock melted. Inside, there were no papers, just a single, leather-bound book. She pulled it out. It wasn't a manifest. It was a recipe book. A very old, hand-written recipe book. The cover was singed, but the pages inside were miraculously preserved. "It's a cookbook," one of the cleanup crew said, dismissively. But Elara was already opening it. The handwriting was elegant, spidery, in Italian. Recipes for cannoli siciliani, pasta con le sarde, cassata. It was a family cookbook, passed down through generations. But as she flipped through the pages, she noticed something odd. The margins were filled with tiny, intricate drawings, not of food, but of ships, and next to each ship, a string of numbers, dates, coordinates, and tiny, hand-drawn crests. The four-tooth key. "It's not a cookbook," Elara whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "It's a codex." Dante was at her side in an instant. "What do you mean?" "During Prohibition, families used to hide shipping records in plain sight. Recipe books, Bibles, children's stories. The women of the family were often the keepers of these books. The recipes are real, but the margins. Look." She pointed to a drawing of a ship next to a recipe for almond cookies. "This ship, the Santa Lucia. The date, 1924. The coordinates. This is a record of a rum shipment. And this crest, it's a notary mark. It proves the transaction was legal under the family's private charter." She flipped through the pages, her mind racing. The entire history of the Vitale shipping empire was hidden in the margins of a cannoli recipe. The manifests weren't destroyed. They were just disguised. The Costellos had burned the decoys, the official papers. They didn't know about the secret, female-led tradition of the codex. Luca, who had been sifting through another pile of debris, came over and looked at the book. He let out a low whistle. "My grandmother used to talk about these books. I thought they were a myth, a fairy tale." "The truth is always hidden in fairy tales," Elara said, looking up at Dante. "You don't need the manifests. You have this. It's a primary source. It's better than the manifests. It's irrefutable." Dante took the book from her hands with a reverence that was almost religious. He stared at the spidery handwriting, the tiny ships, the hidden history of his family. Then he looked at Elara. The cold fury in his eyes had been replaced by something else, something hotter, something that looked a lot like awe. "You found it," he said, "in a pile of ash. You found the one thing that could save us." "It's what I do," Elara said, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "I look at the details." Dante handed the book to Luca. "Get this to the lawyers. File an injunction against the Costellos. We're taking back the docks." Then he turned back to Elara. "Come with me." He led her out of the ruined archive, up a private elevator, and into his penthouse office. The office was a monument to masculine power. Dark wood, leather, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. He walked to a small private bar and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. "You've saved me twice now," he said, his voice low. "First from a bad marriage, now from a business war. I'm starting to think you're my lucky charm." Elara took a sip of the whiskey. It burned going down, but it also steadied her nerves. "I'm just doing my job." "No, you're doing more than that." He moved closer, invading her space in a way that should have been terrifying, but was instead exhilarating. "You're changing things. You're changing me." He reached out and tucked a stray curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by beautiful, empty people. People who lie and scheme and want to take what's mine. And then you walk in, covered in flour and chocolate, and you're the most honest, most brilliant person I've ever met." Elara's breath caught in her throat. I'm not beautiful." Dante's eyes darkened. Don't do that. Don't let the ghosts of those stupid, shallow people tell you what you are. You are magnificent. Your mind, your passion, your everything." His gaze dropped to her lips. "I've been trying to stay away from you. I told myself it was business, but it's not. It hasn't been business since the moment you pointed at that cake and told the truth." He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a claiming, a branding, a declaration of war on her loneliness. His hands cupped her face, tilting her head back as his mouth devoured hers. Elara had been kissed before, fumbling, awkward encounters that left her feeling more self-conscious than desired. This was different. This was a man who knew exactly what he wanted, and what he wanted was her. All of her. The softness of her belly, the curve of her hips, the messy hair, the brilliant brain. He wanted it all. She melted into him, her hands fisting in the lapels of his suit jacket. The world outside the window, the traffic, the skyline, the rival families, the burnt archives, all of it faded into a distant hum. There was only Dante, his scent, his heat, the demanding pressure of his lips. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. His forehead rested against hers. "Stay," he whispered, "not just as a consultant. Stay with me." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was an offer of protection, of passion, of a life she had never dared to imagine. It was also a cage, a beautiful, dangerous, golden cage. But as Elara looked into his storm-gray eyes, she realized the cage door was open. He wasn't locking her in. He was asking her to walk in, of her own free will, and lock it behind her. "Okay," she whispered back. "I'll stay." The transition was not seamless. Elara was a baker, a woman of flour and sugar and early mornings. The world of the Mafia was a world of late nights, whispered threats, and blood-stained money. She kept the bakery open, a lifeline to her old self, but her days were increasingly spent in the Vitale tower, poring over documents with Luca, authenticating artworks, and deciphering the coded messages that the family's enemies were foolish enough to send. She became a ghost in the machine, a secret weapon, the curvy, plus-size baker who could spot a lie from 100 yards. And at night, she was Dante's. Their relationship was a tempest. He was possessive, demanding, and terrifyingly intense. He bought her clothes she never would have chosen for herself, rich silks and velvets that draped over her curves like liquid shadow. He took her to the opera, to private dinners in restaurants that didn't have names, to meetings where men with cold eyes and scarred hands nodded at her with a deference that still felt surreal. He made her feel like a queen, a dark, dangerous queen of a dark, dangerous kingdom. But the shadows were always there. The Costellos, humiliated by the loss of the docks, were not idle. They began a campaign of harassment. The bakery was vandalized. A brick through the window, a spray-painted threat on the door. Marco quit, too terrified to stay. Elara was devastated, but Dante was incandescent with rage. "They touched your shop," he snarled, pacing his office like a caged tiger. "They touched what's mine." "It's just a window," Elara said, trying to calm him, though her own hands were shaking. "It can be fixed. It's not about the window. It's about the message. They think they can scare you. They think they can scare me by scaring you." He stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes blazing. "I'm going to end this. Tonight." "Dante, no. You can't start a war over a bakery. I would burn this city to the ground for you, Elara. A war is nothing." The final confrontation happened at the docks. The very docks that Elara's discovery had saved. The Costellos, in a desperate, final gambit, had seized a Vitale shipment, a container of legitimate, high-end Italian marble, but with a secret compartment holding something far more valuable. The original Vitale family charter, the one with the four-toothed key, which was being moved to a secure vault. It was the ultimate prize. With that document, the Costellos could rewrite history. Dante got the call at midnight. He was out of bed and dressed in seconds, his movements sharp and lethal. "Stay here," he ordered Elara. "Luca will be outside the door. You'll be safe." "No." The word was out of Elara's mouth before she could stop it. "I'm coming with you. It's too dangerous. It's my fight too. They burned the archive. They broke my window. And that charter. I'm the only one who can verify it on site. If they try to destroy it, you'll need me to authenticate the pieces." Dante stared at her for a long moment, a war raging in his eyes, the desire to protect her battling with the knowledge that she was right. Finally, he nodded. "You stay behind me. You do exactly what I say, when I say it. No heroics." "No heroics," she agreed. The docks were a labyrinth of steel and shadow, the air thick with the smell of salt and diesel. The Vitale convoy arrived in a wave of black SUVs, headlights cutting through the fog. The Costellos were waiting, a line of armed men in front of the container. At their head was Enzo Costello, the patriarch, a bull of a man, with a thick neck and a permanent sneer. And beside him, a ghost from the past, Alessia Romano. She looked thinner, harder, her beauty twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "Dante," Enzo bellowed, his voice echoing across the water. "You're trespassing on my dock." "Your dock?" Dante stepped out of the car, his posture relaxed, almost bored. "I believe the courts disagree. Something about a 1924 rum shipment and a cannoli recipe." Enzo's face purpled. "You think you're clever? You and your fat little baker? She won't save you this time." Elara, standing behind the open door of the SUV as instructed, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the fog. Alessia was staring directly at her, a silent promise of violence in her eyes. "Give me the charter," Dante said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register, "and I'll let you walk away. Refuse, and none of you leave this dock." Enzo laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You're outnumbered, Vitale." "Am I?" Dante raised a hand. On the rooftops of the surrounding warehouses, red laser sights flickered to life, dotting the chests of the Costello men. "I don't think so." A tense, brittle silence fell. It was Alessia who broke it. "Just kill him," she screamed, her voice unhinged. "Kill him, and the bitch." But Enzo was a businessman, not a soldier. He saw the laser sights. He saw the odds. He was a bully, and bullies always crumble when faced with a bigger stick. "Stand down," he ordered his men. He turned to Dante, his face a mask of bitter defeat. "The charter is in the container. Take it. This isn't over." "It is for tonight," Dante said. He gestured to Luca. "Open it." Luca and two other men approached the container. The heavy steel doors swung open with a groan. Inside, amidst the crates of marble, was a small, climate-controlled safe. Luca entered the code, a sequence of numbers that corresponded to the date of the four-toothed key's first appearance in history, and the safe hissed open. He pulled out a metal tube and unscrewed the cap. Inside was a roll of ancient, yellowed parchment. He brought it to Elara. "Is it?" Elara took the parchment with trembling hands. She unrolled it carefully, her eyes scanning the text, the seals, the crest. The four-toothed key, the signatures of the three original brothers, the secret watermark that only showed under UV light. It was all there. "It's real," she said, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "It's the original." A collective sigh of relief went through the Vitale men. The charter was safe. The legacy was secure. And then Alessia moved. In the moment of relief, when the guard's attention was on the charter, she lunged. She had a small, pearl-handled pistol hidden in her coat. She raised it, not at Dante, but at Elara. "You ruined my life," she shrieked. "You fat, ugly, meddling freak." Time seemed to slow down. Elara saw the gun, saw the hatred twisting Alessia's face, and knew she couldn't move fast enough. But Dante could. He moved like a shadow, a blur of black suit and lethal intent. He threw himself in front of Elara, his body a shield. The gunshot was deafening, a crack that split the night. Dante grunted, his body jerking, but he didn't fall. He fired back, a single, precise shot that hit Alessia in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending the pistol skittering across the concrete. The dock erupted into chaos. The Vitale snipers opened fire, taking out the Costello men who tried to retaliate. Enzo Costello hit the ground, screaming for mercy. Alessia lay on the concrete, clutching her shoulder, sobbing in pain and fury. But Elara only saw Dante. He was still standing, but his face was pale. A dark stain was spreading on the sleeve of his suit jacket. "You're hit," she gasped, rushing to his side. "It's just a graze," he said through gritted teeth. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're bleeding." Tears were streaming down her face. You jumped in front of a bullet for me." Dante looked at her, his gray eyes softening despite the pain. "I told you. I protect what's mine." He reached up with his good arm and cupped her cheek, his thumb wiping away a tear. "And you, Elara Voss, are mine. My lucky charm. My truth-teller. My heart." The chaos of the dock faded into the background. The sirens in the distance, the groans of the wounded, the barked orders of Luca securing the scene. It all became white noise. There was only Dante, his blood warm on her hands, his words echoing in her soul. "I love you," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I love you, you crazy, dangerous, wonderful man." A real smile, a rare, unguarded smile, broke across Dante's face. It transformed him, chasing away the shadows and the coldness. "I know," he said. "I've known since you argued with me about the correct way to make a cannoli filling. That's when I knew I was going to marry you." "Marry me?" Elara blinked, stunned. "Not today. Obviously. I'm bleeding, and we need to clean up this mess. But soon, we'll have a real wedding, with a real cake, made by you, and a real crest, the four-toothed key, our symbol." He winced as a paramedic finally reached them and began to cut away his sleeve. "What do you say?" Mia verita. My truth. Elara looked at the man who had turned her life upside down, the Mafia boss who had seen her worth when no one else did, the predator who had become her protector, the monster who had given her his heart. She thought about the lonely nights, the mockery, the shame. All of it had led her here, to this bloody, chaotic dock, to this moment of perfect, terrifying clarity. Yes, she said, her voice steady. I'll marry you, but I'm designing the cake, and it's going to be a 7-tier masterpiece with a hand-painted crest that will make historians weep. Dante laughed, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through his chest. I wouldn't have it any other way. The cleanup took hours. The Costellos were finished, their power broken, their patriarch arrested for attempted murder, and a dozen other charges. Alessia was taken away in an ambulance, her dreams of Mafia queendom shattered forever. The Vitale family charter was secured in a new, state-of-the-art vault, with Elara's signature on the authentication documents. As the sun rose over the docks, painting the gray water in shades of rose and gold, Elara stood beside Dante, her arm around his waist, careful to avoid his bandaged shoulder. She was still wearing his blood on her shirt. She was exhausted, traumatized, and happier than she had ever been in her life. What happens now? She asked. Now, Dante said, pressing a kiss to her temple. We go home. You make me one of those almond cookies from the Codex, and we start planning a wedding that will make the grand Asteria party look like a child's tea party. And the bakery? We'll rebuild it. Bigger, better. It will be the most famous bakery in the city. Sweet surrender. The place where the truth was baked into a cake. Elara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. She had walked into a wrong delivery, expecting humiliation. She had found a conspiracy, a purpose, and a love that was as dark and sweet as the richest chocolate. She was no longer just the plus-size baker. She was the heart of the Vitale Empire, the keeper of the four-toothed key, the woman who saw the truth. And she was finally, completely, home.